Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 67 of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And this is Aaron, and Brian and I we're crossing the streams tonight. We're doing a bit of a divide and conquer. He is simultaneously recording episode 68 right now. We're trying something a little new. We're trying to add some more content to the system, so please let us know what you think. So I was lucky enough to attend the Amazon AWS reInvent conference last week, and something that was really nice from the conference, we had a great problem. We had more guests than we had time, and so some things are spilling over to this week, but this actually, instead of doing some mini casts like we did last week, we're actually doing a full cast for this. There's some really cool announcements that came out of the Amazon conference, and so we have some great guests here to talk about it tonight. And so this week, good friend of both Brian and I for a long time, but has never made an appearance on the show. So we have Vaughn Stewart from NetApp. Vaughn, why don't you say hey and give a quick background?
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me on. It's a shame that we can't have Brian as well. I miss that guy, but thanks for having me on, and I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. And next up, we have Mark Beaupre, also with NetApp. So go ahead, Mark.
Hi there, Aaron. I'm just glad to be here with you.
Awesome. And lastly, we have Luis Benavides. And Luis he is not with NetApp. He is actually with a cloud professional services company. He is CEO of that company and is Day One Solutions. And they're actually a launch partner of one of our main topics this evening. So Luis, welcome.
Thank you very much, Aaron. And you can tell Brian that we don't miss him. Just kidding.
There you go.
Just kidding, Brian.
Yeah, and by the way, just for the listeners out there, Luis knows Brian as well. So first of all, before we went into some of the other talks about NetApp and AWS solutions specifically, Luis and I both were at the conference last week, and just wanted to start off with some general impressions. One of the biggest things that me personally I saw was the number of enterprise vendors there. My company, Citrix, was a top-level sponsor and had some announcements at the show. SAP had some major announcements around the show. And of course, NetApp had some really interesting announcements that drew a lot of attention. And so one of the biggest things I saw was on the vendor side, an adoption of some of these quote-unquote enterprise vendors. As well as some enterprise customers. I don't necessarily want to name any names, but having some drinks with some very large enterprise customers that really had some unique use cases that I had never thought of before, and quite frankly, just never would have been possible or achieved a great level of cost savings, or some of these other great stories that you always hear about with cloud computing these days. And so it was really interesting to me how real world the AWS conference was, and it was very well attended. Now, Luis, what was the total attendance? Was it 5,000, 6,000, somewhere in there?
I think the official number was around 5,700, but they had a lot of folks that had come in late, and they surpassed 6,000.
Wow. And Luis, what did you see? Because you met with a lot of customers and had a lot of meetings. So tell me about your week last week.
Yeah, we did. I think for us, we were one of the few cloud consulting type companies that were there. And, my background working at NetApp and working at Amazon, we worked a lot with I worked a lot with the ISV ecosystem and folks on my team. And that's kind of the people we've brought together. So a lot of catching up, a lot of strategic conversations. And then as far as end customers go, like you said, a lot of those major ISVs who we partner with had solution announcements and brought their customers there. And, we were just involved with a lot of those conversations. I think one of the things I noticed just quickly at AWS, and kind of to your point, that it's pretty massive. The ISV ecosystem out there is pretty huge. And you have those folks that are the startups, and then you have the other larger kind of enterprise vendors that are, looking at a way to partner with Amazon.
Let's talk a little bit more about this specific solution here. Really, really interesting solution. And actually, I don't know if you guys saw or not, and I'll put a link to some of these links that I'm talking about in the show notes. But actually today, was it today or very recently, CRN for the year, and AWS storage specifically and all the announcements around it was actually listed as the number one storage story for 2012. And specifically this solution, the NetApp Private Storage for Amazon Web Services, was mentioned in with all of the announcements for the year. And so Vaughn, I'll ask you first to tell us a little bit about this, because what is a quote unquote enterprise storage vendor playing with Amazon Web Services?
Yes, that's actually a very good question. I think suffice to say the impetus for NetApp and Amazon coming together was really driven out of customer demands. The ever evolving landscape of cloud computing is really advancing a number of means where, in terms of how services are delivered and data centers are operated. And to be frank, we have a large number of customers that were looking to drive more agility into their cloud solutions, wanting to branch from their private cloud into a more type of hybrid infrastructure that carried over a number of their enterprise data management functionalities into the AWS space. And so NetApp Private Storage for AWS really results in customers being able to leverage the means in which they access their data sets in a more dynamic fashion, one that is off-premise and gives them a lot of flexibility. So, this solution, if I were to back up and maybe refine my statement a bit, it was really about, customers seeking more cost-effective and flexible solutions that preserved their enterprise storage and data management capabilities that they're used to with NetApp. Those capabilities are in our snapshots and cloning and replication models that, to summarize those who aren't familiar, NetApp has a means of being able to do a single replication stream, and that copy of data that is stored on the remote disk can then be leveraged in multiple different uses without making full copies of it. So that drives a lot of time out of any type of provisioning or data hydration process. So test and development, business analytics, disaster recovery, right? All these functions basically can be spun out of a single copy. And so the Amazon Web Services allows customers to not have to purchase a compute or virtualization infrastructure to be able to capitalize on their copy of data that's stored in a Amazon Direct Connect facility.
Awesome, and that's actually a perfect lead into. So Mark, you at NetApp, you really helped on some of kind of the technical architecture and some of the documentation behind all of this, and so tell us a little bit about the technical details behind this, because a lot of people out there are probably scratching their head going, well, how does that work? And so tell us that it involves an Amazon Direct Connect facility and Amazon Direct Connect, and so tell us a little bit about the architecture and the details behind it.
Sure. Vaughn touched upon it at a high level, but essentially what we're taking advantage of it, we have NetApp FAS storage controller or a vFiler that's backed by another. If you have some other storage that's in the Direct Connect facility, and that storage is basically connected to EC2 AMI virtual machine instances that are connected via the Amazon Direct Connect. And what we can do then is, if let's say if it's a Windows VM, let's say, that you can then connect that VM to the NetApp storage via iSCSI. Then you can take advantage of the iSCSI block protocols, expose certain workloads that need block to iSCSI lens on the NetApp, be able to take advantage of the NetApp snapshots and data management software that we provide, and gives our customers that flexibility. So that's basically it at a very high level.
Very, very cool. And so and as a ex, NetApp architect kind of person, can you do the NetApp VSA, or does it have to be physical file or hardware?
Basically, if you can run SnapMirror, you can use basically if you can do NetApp, anything, then you can use that. So VSA supports SnapMirror and SnapVault.
Gotcha.
So yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Luis.
So I was going to.
Sorry, Vaughn. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this is Vaughn. So I was going to jump in here, but I think what's important to really call out in the AWS design is that the explosion of cloud computing, whether it's hypervisors or virtual machines, or the applications, whether traditional applications or next-gen applications, there's a lot of focus, or I would even state the majority of the focus tends to be at that level. Technologies like network and storage tend to get viewed as infrastructure and tend to have less light shed on them. The NetApp Private Storage for AWS really highlights that the need for computing and for applications is really the means in which data is exchanged. And data is the lifeblood of a company, whether it's holding on to its customer records, whether it's intellectual property, right? Whether it's historical, records needs, etc. Customers really value data, and AWS, particularly the NetApp Private Storage solution for AWS, I should say, really, I think, reinforces the value at which an enterprise looks at its data and yet wants to shift into a more agile infrastructure. And so instead of looking for, more cloud-based storage connectivity options, instead the customers have moved to a more cloud-based compute style of architecture. And I think that's really important to look at. AWS allows customers to have a number of hybrid solutions per se that even with cloud computing and server virtualization, if they were to implement, would be a significant capital investment that they'd have to make. And instead, AWS flips that to an OpEx model. So while the storage controller is still a CapEx investment, customers appreciate the value of the data management of NetApp, but they want to shift the rest of their infrastructure to leverage that.
Yep. And so, Luis, you and I were actually talking about this offline earlier. Tell me about some of the use cases that developed, and even some of the kind of after the announcement or during the announcement last week, kind of new use cases that were bubbling to the top with using this architecture, because it seems to be something you can do so many different things with, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We have customers today that are really interested in this for their non-production workloads. So in that regard, I think one of the things I always used to find is that they don't necessarily do things at the full scale that they're able to do. So when you take a look at, okay, they're doing backup, they're doing archive, they're doing disaster recovery, they may be doing some test dev. I think with this type of a system, especially when married up with something like FlexClone from NetApp, they're able to further take advantage of that, but with a very large abundance of resources. And even to the point about CapEx and OpEx, you could blend the two. I think you could also have an OpEx model. We offer that to some customers today. So you really have a very flexible, agile platform, I think, as Val had stated it. Mm-hmm. One more thing to add from an Amazon perspective, as far as us being an Amazon partner and engaging our customers that are interested in the solution, I think one of the things that we found is that with this type of solution, it really bridges the gap for those enterprise customers as Amazon's growing more and more into that space, running into a lot of those NetApp environments, and without having to be overly disruptive and changing the way that they administer storage. This is a great bridge to that, and I think that's pretty important, especially with obviously data on tap. Gartner says #1 OS worldwide. This is a very easy way to go adopt the cloud, especially for a lot of those first movers, and that's definitely another use case that we see.
Sure. And I just want to throw this out to make sure we're kind of like AWS 101 guys. We've been saying, an Amazon Direct Connect facility and utilizes Direct. What exactly is Amazon Direct Connect, first of all?
I can take
okay. Go ahead, take that, Luis.
No worries. So an Amazon Direct Connect facility is is done usually with partners. So these co-location and telco type providers, where AWS regions are somewhat close by within a certain proximity, and in order to have I guess basically what amounts to a dark fiber connection. So in these facilities, they have networking cages that allows customers to bring their network connection to the facility and more or less have a logical connection back to Amazon. So with that said,
you're directly plugging into the mothership.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, literally, part of the solution is that you'll get a letter of authorization where the guys will actually literally run the basically the network cabling from Amazon to where the cage is, where your NetApp storage is at, or actually the network switches and routers in your cage where the NetApp storage is at. But that's exactly right.
And what they're doing to kind of take this one step further, so that's what a Direct Connect facility is. What they're doing is they're hosting NetApp storage in the Direct Connect facility so that your on-premise NetApp hardware will replicate to their NetApp hardware, correct?
Yeah, you could either do a standalone system that's in the co-location facility married with AWS Direct Connect, or like you said, you could have the network connection back to the customer on-prem. But even with that, you don't always need the private circuit. You could always use third-party products like your Riverbeds, your F5s for the replication piece. It just kind of depends on what you need as far as requirements go, and folks like us will architect it.
It's a very flexible architecture. So you can, partners like Luis's firm can, really architect out some custom solutions based upon this. It isn't. There's a lot of flexibility built into this solution, which makes it very nice.
But by the way, if you do want to see what we're describing here, you can have a visual aid and download one of our data sheets, which has a pretty good architecture on it.
Yes, and actually, good you mentioned that. I actually have a link to that in the show notes as well. So there's links to the announcement. Val, who's a good friend of ours as well. Val works in the CTO office at NetApp. His blog announcement of the entire thing, which has seen a lot of traffic. Luis's data sheet. So there'll be a good bit of information available in the show notes about this. Now, something else I was wondering too, is this because really I think a lot of people when they think about use cases in their head, they're just thinking about, okay, I have on-premise data that I want to put into AWS, but isn't it also really will work both ways? I mean, this is a two-way solution, correct?
So from a technical perspective, NetApp replication can go bi-directionally. So again, a technically or engineering correct or specific answer would be yes, a customer could move their workload from AWS back to on-premise. And frankly, there's likely some use cases where that may happen. For example, say a new application is being developed or some new research is being developed, and it's most cost-effective to store it in the EC2 framework. And over time, the requirements of that system, the application, the data that it's accessing, need to come back on-premise. This solution would allow that. And there's a lot of comfort, I think, to customers knowing that their data is not locked and lost in a cloud. But with that said, I think there's a number of use cases that once the customers start to adopt the NetApp Private Storage for AWS, we're not so sure that data is going to come back on site. So, for example, I think, earlier I spoke to the replication constructs and customers doing snapshot-based backups and replicating those backups off-site. EC2 offers a significantly simple means to provide data analytics on customers' data, because backup to disk data that's been backed up to disk, I should say, still remains in its native format with native metadata, et cetera. And so to be able to analyze your data warehouse, for lack of a better terms, natively as a byproduct from your snapshot backup and replication, and the enablement of that is the dynamic means to instantiate EC2 instances so that we can access, so that a customer can access this data. Something like that where you're adding on a new net value to the business that's really on an OpEx model, doesn't require any additional infrastructure, and leverages off of a function like backup and DR that you're going to implement anyways, I don't think services like that ever come out of the cloud.
Yeah, I could see one where we have I know one of our customers who, they're looking at this very hard and where they replicate data via their NetApp storage controllers via SnapMirror on their own data centers, replicating to the Amazon Direct Connect location, and then basically spinning up a whole bunch of EC2, crunch some data, and then replicate it back, and then moving data from their on-prem data center up into the private storage for AWS, crunch the data, and then move it back. So it's a very, and like Vaughn said, it totally turns a huge capital investment into more of an operational thing, especially when this customer, they're only doing this at specific times of the year, for their you basically tape out is what they use it for.
I'll give you two additional examples that we had, saw as far as opportunities and use cases. But, you have a lot of data center consolidation efforts going on, folks that have 30 plus, 100 plus data centers, and they really want to consolidate these workloads. In some cases, they may be looking at, having Direct Connect in place in order to kind of stop some of the legacy growth and sprawl and expand into the AWS NetApp type of solution. Or they may even use it more for like a data center migration. But to your point, from the Amazon side, we don't really find a lot of customers that use this as a temporary space. And then the last use case of that is kind of to that same point. Folks that are in the kind of the application development world, or frankly just kind of app dev, test dev environments, where they figure, all right, well, let's use AWS as a testing environment. But once they kind of saw the benefits there, they usually end up staying. And in some cases, we had customers that would use, not necessarily non-production, but let's say DR Site B in AWS and their customer on-prem, and then eventually flip it. And I think this type of solution really helps them get there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So
we also have had a number of conversations with customers who have quite diverse infrastructure. So, for example, with the current state of cloud computing, customers are starting to diversify their hypervisor platforms based on the desires of the application owners themselves. And so when you start having a multi-hypervisor solution, considering disaster recovery automation tools, etc., that can start to become a significant investment within an infrastructure. The NetApp Private Storage for AWS provides a means for disaster recovery, particularly multi-site, multi-hypervisor disaster recovery under the EC2 umbrella that, to be frank, is OpEx driven, so it's almost like an insurance policy payment versus having to do a capital expenditure, but also is powerful enough to be able to support a number of virtual infrastructures, and with NetApp's data management capabilities can actually help transform data structures between different hypervisor types without having to actually recopy the data.
So, Vaughn, let's not forget about vSeries and ONTap Edge to kind of further expand, those heterogeneous storage environments and kind of having them all under a data ONTap umbrella. And like I said, I think this is one of those use cases that helps folks adopt, elastic compute and storage from NetApp.
Yeah, so I think the way you summarize this, Aaron, is if your model is just to fire up some servers through EC2, some virtual server instances to access some of your data, the likelihood of that activity, going on premise or going off premise, that's something that sounds more temporary. But if customers are building business solutions, whether it's data analytics, whether it's disaster recovery, right, those tend to have a long-standing tenure within a customer's ecosystem and really cements AWS as part of the extension of the customer infrastructure and operations.
And one more thing too. This is also a standalone solution. If you wanted to just have an isolated environment that was AWS with NetApp, you don't necessarily always need to have a multi-architecture, but it kind of depends on what the needs are and the requirements.
Sure. And so let me ask you this, guys. if you watch the AWS keynotes, they really a couple times in there, quite frankly, poo-pooed on the idea of on-premise resources. And how does this solution really fit into that message? Aren't they kind of in some way acknowledging on-premise resources by this announcement? Or is this, tell me a little bit about, I don't want to say like, speak on behalf of AWS, but like, how do you think this fits in with some of the messaging that came out of the keynotes last week?
Luis, do you want to take this?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. So I think with the words private cloud and public cloud, it's becoming a lot more blended, or maybe not even blended. It's kind of disappearing. I think resources, when we're talking about this kind of a architecture or hybrid architecture, it's really a mix of on-premise and off-premise workloads, and then where those workloads best reside. So when you take a look at the strength of AWS, they have an amazing security story, and if you ever get to sit down with one of the security folks, and trust me, we had a lot of very high-level customers that would do this, that are just amazed at how they treat security. We call it, I think, or we used to call it when I was there, security is kind of like at level 0, right? Nothing happens without that, and if that were to not be a priority, then Amazon would kind of go out of business, right? But my point there is, they do things that are very unique, that's very years ahead of industry. But with that said, there's definitely customers that have requirements and need for isolation. So I think this kind of solution provides you that private storage or physical storage needs, right? That physical storage isolation. But then you have Direct Connect and you have a private circuit. You have virtual private cloud from AWS, which gives you that network isolation wrapped around EC2. And then you can further enhance that by even having dedicated instances, which allow you to have isolation back on the physical host. So it's a very attractive solution to those folks that are looking to meet certain requirements that they haven't been able to fulfill before.
Yeah, I would add to that it's all about making the technology easy to adopt for the customer. And so in a number of CIO conversations that I've had over the past year and a half or so, there's been a lot of concern around when one moves to the cloud, particularly a public cloud, there's concerns around where's their data actually residing. Is there regulatory or legal reasons where they must know where their data resides? Is if the data trespasses, say, state government trespasses state lines, is that inbounds or out of bounds depending on the state and the laws of that land? So this solution for AWS allows customers to know where their data is and actually have control and have that comfort set while being able to adopt all these advantages of a hybrid cloud infrastructure. So I think from a consumption model, right, we help bridge some of those challenges that exist today and allow customers to move forward. I think a second consideration is, again, on the concept of making it easy for customers to adopt. I think when you talk about moving production or primary workloads into a cloud, a lot of executives and leaders hesitate. But when you say, I'm going to move your ancillary, your secondary types of data or workloads into the cloud, again, I think there's a greater comfort level there. And so, again, this NetApp public storage for AWS, I think, really eases the consumption model. Now, in time, I expect more production workloads to move to the cloud, but this is a real nice first step for the enterprise.
So let me ask you this, and this is an open question to everyone. Typical NetApp enterprise storage customer today is running typically a VMware infrastructure. And so if somebody is interested in this solution, like how do you get from point A to point B? Because those architectures, when you kind of start to peel back the covers, and don't go into, I guess, super low-level details, but at a very high level, how would you begin to bridge those architectures, and what are the first couple steps? What are the baby steps to potentially set yourself up from going from one environment to the other environment?
Well, we found a 4-block free space in the fiber channel packet where we insert a proprietary flag. I kid, of course. So you're right, Aaron. Part of NetApp's hypergrowth over the last six or 7 years has been really fueled with the adoption of virtualization, which has been led by, undoubtedly led by VMware. And while our customer bases are very diverse with their virtualization technologies today, as I stated earlier, some of those technologies are a little bit more easy to be compatible with AWS in terms of the virtual machine formats and the virtual storage formats. VMware, though, is one where AWS does have a means for importing VMware virtual machines to run an AWS environment, and there are some NetApp technologies that we have that Mark has helped me create a video for that we're going to put online that we're going to be sharing shortly that allows customers to actually flip between hypervisors without having to copy their data. Basically leveraging the data management constructs inside of NetApp, we can modify some of the metadata so that the flip between hypervisors is basically a virtual machine reboot.
So Vaughn, we actually have a customer, we actually met with the customer today, and this is exactly the scenario we're going through. So we probably need to follow up after this, but one of the things that we did explore were to have separate workloads that were running in this type of environment, or if I think what kind of we're probably heading down the path of is perhaps having to re-architecture some of the VMware existing environment in order to be a bit more compatible. But one more thing that I should mention around Amazon Web Services is, they do have capabilities like VM import today. So as AWS continues down the path of VMware compatibility or VMware onboarding into AWS, I think you'll start seeing this become easier and easier as time goes on.
Very cool, very cool. All right, guys, so we're about at that time where everyone kind of at home, they start tuning out. So any quick closing thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
I think the one thing I'd like for folks to understand, these are two pretty big two big industry cloud players here. This is really should be viewed more of as a first stage in the evolution of this type of a solution. I think there's definitely a bigger picture here that's at play, and the more that customers ask for these type of solutions or further integration, I think really being at both companies, this is what they both do very well, and they will continue to evolve down this path of tighter and tighter integration as their customers demand.
Yeah, I agree. NetApp is known throughout the technology industry for being innovative. I think the NetApp Private Storage for AWS is another shining example of where we help move the industry forward. I think as we close out this year and go into next year, I think you'll see a continued focus on NetApp in a number of areas. The enhancement of our clustered ONTap storage technology. I think the continued expansion in terms of driving capabilities into the cloud market, whether it's private, hybrid, public. I think these are things that should be expected, and I think it's safe for me to say that. I don't think I shared any industry secrets there.
Very cool. So guys, what I'll do is I'm going to in the show notes put contacts for everyone, where to get hold of everyone, where to find more information about the solution. So please, everyone, take a look at the show notes for this episode. It's going to be very heavy on the show notes this time around. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to give a quick thank you to everyone out there that has contributed to the Cloudcast charity project. For those of you that don't know, there's a race in Raleigh called the Krispy Kreme Challenge, and it benefits the North Carolina Children's Hospital, and we are raising money for it. We are at 35% of our $1,000 goal. So, and again, we are matching dollar for dollar up to the first $1,000 for this. And so if you're fortunate enough to have healthy children, you just want to help a great cause, you want to just give a little bit of appreciation for us, please, we would love if you would consider us. The link to that is on our webpage, thecloudcast.net, in the upper right-hand corner. And as always, kind of closing it out, if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes, and you can certainly follow us on Twitter at thecloudcastnet or on the web at thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. And for that, Luis, Mark, and Vaughn, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you.
Aaron.